Hello, good morning. Welcome to the Sunday Show. I'm Martin Geisler. Coming up this morning, in 60 years, Singapore transformed from an economic backwater to one of the best performing economies in the world. So, could Scotland learn from this small nation powerhouse? The entrepreneur and philanthropist Sir Tom Hunter thinks we could, and he's going to be here to tell us why. It's a year since the Scottish Government declared a housing emergency across the country. So why are so many families still living in temporary accommodation? I'll ask Scotland's Cabinet Secretary for Social Justice, Shirley-Anne Somerville. And from Tory MP to Lord Gove of Torry, Michael Gove tells the Sunday Show about rising to the Lords, the circumstances that could see another independence referendum, and why the Scottish Conservatives shouldn't panic yet. After that, it is over to Graham Stewart on the radio and on BBC Sounds. Hi, Graham.
Morning, Martin. Is the Prime Minister about to reset our relationship with Europe? We'll be discussing this morning. Knockhill, the famous racing circuit in Fife, is celebrating its 50th birthday. We'll be reflecting on the Scottish motor racing scene. And to quote the UK's entry, what the hell just happened at Eurovision last night? We'll be conducting an inquiry with two superfans.
I should think so too. More from Graham on the radio in half an hour. Let's get on with the show. Yeah, lots of conversation in the studio this morning. A conversation too going on social media as ever. If you want to take part in that, just use the usual hashtag, BBC Sunday Show. Now then, there is a spread of stories across the papers this morning, but the front page of the Sunday Times carries a piece by one of Scotland's most significant business people, lamenting the state of our nation. Sir Tom Hunter says we are in a state of managed decline, and he is deeply worried for our future. He reckons we should look to Singapore for inspiration as to how the country might grow. Cutting taxes and prioritising business, he believes, are the key. Well, not only is he on the front page of the Sunday Times, he is here with me in the studio to tell me more. Sir Tom Hunter, good morning.
Morning, Mark.
A pretty scathing assessment, this, that you've written of the state our country is in. Why? Why now?
Well, I think we're ahead of election in about a year's time, Martin, and I'm looking for the big ideas, the bold ideas for Scotland. But if we look at where we are, a kind of state of the union, not in a political sense, but our education standards are falling, our health service is struggling, and we have a lacklustre economy. So if this was a business, which is my background, I would be looking to see where my competitors were doing better than me. We got Oxford Economics to do a piece on Ireland, lessons that Scotland could learn. I was completely ignored, but I haven't given up. We've now did it on Singapore.
Right. Why Singapore? I mean, OK, they've got similar populations, Scotland and Singapore, but culturally, geographically, wildly different. There's a lot of evidence, actually, it's not a great place to be if you're not rich. It's got a reputation for having a very stressed, overworked population. There's no welfare for foreigners. There's no minimum wage. Is that what we want to aspire to?
Well, no. Obviously, we take the best from there, Martin. We don't take the worst. But why we look to these places like Singapore or like Ireland is over the past 60 years in Singapore, 40 years in Ireland, they have grown their economy from a place of real difficulty, and they have had long-term leadership, and they have plotted out their growth. And now Singapore has one of the best GDPs per capita in the world. And I would argue the people in Singapore have a great health service, they have a great housing stock, and they have one of the best education systems in the world.
Right, so what do we need to do to emulate that? What are the good pieces? What are the good pieces you're cherry picking from them?
Well, I guess the first thing, Martin, and it's like anything else, if you want to change something, it's the leadership. So Lee Kuan Yew, who's the godfather of Singapore, he said straight away, and they had a problem with corruption. We don't have a problem with corruption in Scotland. But if I juxtapose, the Prime Minister of Singapore is paid $2.2 million per year. We pay our First Minister to do the hardest job in Scotland, £165,000. The countries with the best talent win. Do we have the best talent? running our country, number one. Number two...
What do you think the answer is to that?
I will let you and your viewers decide.
Well, you've obviously got an opinion. You're saying we don't pay enough, so am I right in surmising you think we haven't got the best people?
I would say we could do better, Martin, yes, definitely. And money is one part of that. It isn't the only answer, but we need to encourage better people into politics. The hardest job in this country is running the country. Can we get the best people doing it? The second hardest job is running the NHS. Can we get the best people doing this? The second point to learn from Singapore is really quite simple. Let's be pro-business. Let's go back to basics. It's very simple in that how does governments pay for the civil society? How do we pay for our NHS, our education, the civil society which we all want? Well, frankly, governments set a tax regime to raise tax from you and me and business, and they decide how to spend it. My proposition is that Scotland has not been a pro-business friendly country for the past 10 years, let's say. It's getting better under John Swinney and Kate Forbes, but under Nicola Sturgeon, it was not business friendly, and that was to the detriment of Scotland, and that's why I say managed decline. Let government sit with business and produce their business policies with business, not to business without any consultation with them.
You said you were ignored, completely ignored, when you came up with your report on Ireland. I mean, how often are you knocking on the door saying, I'm here to help? And what response do you get when you do?
Well, to be fair to the First Minister at the time of the Ireland report, which was Humza Yousaf, he did invite us in and his cabinet was there and he listened and then did the complete opposite of what was in the report in terms of tax. You know, I am all about growing the tax take, and it's not about the tax rate, it's about the tax take. If we can get better wealth creators to Scotland, they will create the jobs, they will pay more tax, not because of the rate, but because of the take.
It's a hard sell, though. I mean, firstly, it's a hard sell saying politicians should be paid more, right? That's a difficult sell for a start. But also make the rich richer, which is effectively what you're saying. This kind of trickle-down economics theory, which there is a strong argument doesn't work because a lot of the wealth goes up the pipe to the rich, and then they just kind of invest in assets and all the rest of it, and it hangs there and doesn't come back down to the rest of us like it's meant to.
Well, let's take an example just now of the Westminster government and their non-dom policy. You have very rich people leaving Britain. So some clever person in Westminster, probably with a degree from Oxford, would sit with a spreadsheet and say, oh yes, we will tax the non-doms more. Well, these non-doms, capital is portable, Martin, and they leave the country. They leave. And there's this terrible thing where people say, well, good riddance. But if you've got somebody like Lakshmi Mittal, the steel magnate, leaving Britain, his tax pays for about 90,000 people's benefits. Who pays for them now?
Do you think Scotland should have total control over all of its tax powers? Because I'm sure Shirley-Anne Somerville, who's coming on after you, will tell us there's loads we could do, there's loads we'd like to do, but we don't have the levers.
Yeah, so basically, there are plenty of things we can do today. Tomorrow morning, let's solve the housing crisis. We can do it. We can absolutely do it. It's very simple. Build, baby, build, to take a phrase from Over the Pond. And to solve the housing crisis, you need to build more houses. Really? Yeah, that's it. Housing investors allocate their capital where they understand the policy. I know of hundreds of millions of pounds that are sitting in the sidelines, not coming to Scotland because the investors go, they're not quite sure what the Scottish Government's housing policy is. Rent cap, no rent cap, what is it? We'll just go to Manchester. We'll just go to Birmingham. And therefore, sort the policy, sort it tomorrow, and hundreds of millions of pounds will flow into Scotland. Then we need to get our apprentices sorted, our skills. Let's get a joined up approach to let Scotland flourish.
You're talking also about red tape. in this. What's your experience of that? I mean, you've got a lot of business interests.
Yeah. So from a point of view, we say in the report, how long does it take to get planning permission for a warehouse? Singapore, 35 days. Scotland, 5 times as long. 5 times as long. Now, why is that? I would say that there's a system been built up in planning which satisfies the system. And just think of it in these terms, Martin. If you're taking 5 times as long to get the warehouse up, then the people who are employed in that warehouse are not paying their taxes, are not paying their NIC as quick. We could really take a swathe through the regulation and planning and get it working.
Is this, I mean, I go back to my question about tax. Do you think Scotland should have total control, total tax economy, total control of its own finances? I mean, there's an argument, right? The prospectus you're putting out here is an argument for independence.
Well, maybe I wouldn't go that far. I don't think the economic argument for independence is there yet. If it's independence, just more of the same, then the whole of Scotland will be poorer. That's not my opinion, that is a fact. But if we could get a low tax economy, what I'm asking for in this is to do it within the UK and to say to Keir Starmer, let's make the whole of Scotland an enterprise zone so that we can make Scotland the green capital of the world.
I'm sure Shirley-Anne Somerville, by the way, will contest that an independent Scotland would definitely be poorer, but your argument is if it just carries on the way it is. Let me just ask you finally before you go, I mean, you're coming in here with a series of problems. I mean, you do have your sleeves rolled up in front of me just now. What are you offering to do? Well,
listen, as always, and I have been round speaking to lots of business people of all political persuasion, and everybody's worried. I've never saw people so angry about what's happening in the country just now. We pay more for worse outcomes from our services, and therefore, but every one of them, every single one of them is saying, Tom, we are willing to help. So, is the government listening? If the phone don't ring, I'll know it's the government. You don't have to wait for the phone. We'll find out in just a couple of seconds. Sir Tom Hunter, thank you very much indeed. There is quite a lot to get into with the government in all of that, and I am pleased to say that just out of shot to my left, the Cabinet Secretary for Social Justice, Shirley-Anne Somerville, is just about to settle into the very seat that Sir Tom has just vacated. We will give her a second or two to get comfortable. She's been in the news, of course, this week because it is exactly a year since she declared a national housing emergency, and some campaign groups have used that anniversary to level some pretty stinging criticism at her and her government. They say not enough's been done to tackle the crisis. Well, let's find out what she has to say. Shirley-Anne Somerville, good morning.
Good morning.
A fairly damning report card delivered to your government there by Sir Tom Hunter. Is it fair?
Well, I think what Sir Tom has quite rightly done, as I hope business people and those indeed in charities and elsewhere will do, is present us with some issues that they want the government to tackle and then challenge the government to step forward. So I very much welcome Sir Tom's report.
Your government ignored the last one, he just told us.
Oh, well, I think that's slightly unfair. There'll be some areas where we will disagree on aspects, but I'm sure within this report, which I haven't had the opportunity to read in full as yet, there will be areas that we can be agreeing on. But I think what Sir Tom does raise is there is something inherently challenging in the system that Scotland, the UK, finds itself in at the moment. And we need to rise to that occasion. That's exactly what the First Minister is doing and going forward, particularly with his working with business to see what more needs to be done to encourage investment in. And the First Minister and Deputy First Minister are doing an incredible amount of work because they recognise we need to listen to people like Sir Tom and others who want to bring investment into the country and to have an area where we can flourish.
On the subject of listening to experts, it's not just Sir Tom. I was listening to Dan Needle speaking on the radio or on a podcast this week. He's a really well-respected tax expert, so well-respected, in fact, your government chose to bring him in and put him on your tax advisory group. He was talking about the increase of the top rate of tax lifting it by 3% to 48%. He said you didn't consult your tax advisory group on that. All these experts you'd assembled were sitting waiting to be asked. You never asked them, you just went and did it. And he says it's all politics, that it wasn't economic. Is that fair? Is that right?
Well, I think we do obviously have to look in, and we do this within government, about looking at the implications of changing tax, whether that's up or down. But what we need...
You've got a panel of experts. You didn't ask them about this really radical and significant policy shift.
Well, it was a change to the tax policy, but what we do look is the implications for that. And the implications for that and the progressive taxation we do have in Scotland is that allows us to have £1.5 billion more coming into our public services. So I appreciate there are calls for tax cuts, but we do have to appreciate, particularly in the short term, that means cuts to public services.
Does it, though? Because there's the Laffer curve, right, that illustrates where, or suggests where, the maximum tax take can be. And the argument is that once you go past that percentage, you actually take less tax because money disappears. So we don't actually know whether you... I mean, how much more are you getting from this 48% at the moment?
Well, the overall progressive taxation system that we have, as compared to the UK, for the totality of the changes we've made, allows for £1.5 billion more to come into the system than we would already have. So I appreciate there may be people who wish to see that and can make a case that there will be changes in the longer term about what will happen with tax hikes. But in the short term, as we are setting our budgets, as we do, taking those decisions, if you were to change those decisions, that would see £1.5 billion coming out. Now, of course, what those tax takes do also allow us to do is that social contract with the people, whether it's free tuition, free prescriptions, whether it's our early learning and childcare offer for 3 and 4 and eligible 2-year-olds. Those are aspects which many people also who do pay that higher taxation can benefit from. And of course we have the majority of people in Scotland not paying any more tax than they do in the rest of the UK. So we do ask people to pay a little bit more, but for that we do have services here in Scotland that are not available elsewhere in the UK.
OK. Is there too much red tape in Scotland? Tom was talking there about the fact that it takes 5 times as long to get a warehouse built here than it does in Singapore. We hear about offshore wind farms that are taking 7 years to get out of the red tape. House builders are saying they give up because they get stuck in the treacle of bureaucracy, local government bureaucracy. Things just don't happen quickly enough. Is that a fair criticism?
Well, that's exactly why the Planning Minister, Ivan McKay, is doing a tremendous amount of work with private developers and others to see what needs to change. So, for example, a look at all the systems within planning to see whether there are policies in there that are out of date or being used in a way that is different in one part of Scotland than it is in another part of Scotland. And then that makes a real challenge for developers to take aspects forward.
Been in power for 17 years. I mean, this is ongoing, right? This is problems that you could have solved at any point over that period.
Well, we have to continuously challenge ourselves on that to see if more can be done, and that's exactly what the Minister's doing. So we do think we've made progress in the planning system with the National Planning Framework 4, but we're not going to sit there, and I'll never sit here and say government has all the answers, because we do listen to private developers, and if they're saying that things are still too slow in some areas, then we need to look at that. But that's exactly why we have a planning hub now established. Now, what that is something which will provide expertise and knowledge to local authorities. So again, I'm not sitting here thinking that's an issue for local authorities. They need to look at how long they're going to take. We're taking an interventionist approach as the government, an activist approach, to see what the government can do to assist those local authorities.
We just heard there are hundreds of millions of pounds, right, that could come into Scotland in build-to-rent developments. There are now going to Manchester, to Birmingham, to Newcastle, and not coming here because people don't know what your policy is going to be. They don't see consistency and a sense of purpose from your government on that.
Well, the build to rent is a very interesting example. Only a few days ago, I was speaking to representatives of investors in the build to rent market. Now, while we have had a disagreement about whether rent controls should come to Scotland or not, the government's been very clear that it should. But we're very clear to do that in a way that will actually provide that certainty for private investors. So why is this money being withheld?
The money's not coming here, we've just heard, because there is not certainty.
Well, what I heard during the week in one of the conversations I had literally a few days ago was the certainty we're providing with the housing bill that's currently going through Parliament, which has a formula on rent caps in the bill, that was a change we made, listening to private developers. Those are the types of areas where, yes, of course, I want to make sure we have rent controls in Scotland, because there is a cost of living crisis and we do need to help people with rent controls that are too high. But we're doing so in a way where there is certainty. We're providing that in the bill through the formula, and I heard that welcomed by developers when I was speaking to them only this week.
I mean, there's another argument that we could have, we don't have time for this morning, about the impact of those rent controls. We've had that many times. So you declared a housing emergency a year ago this week. Where's the evidence that you're treating it like an emergency? Where's the radical action? There are measures here and there, but where's the crisis action?
Well, I think what we've heard is that there's not one solution to the housing emergency, but that's exactly why the Housing to 2040 Board, which brings together private developers, Shelter, Crisis, COSLA, as well as the government, can get together and look at specific examples. So the Housing Coalition gave us 17 asks to look through. We are going through those. We have achieved many of the asks.
Just build more houses. That's how you get rid of a housing emergency, isn't it? And all these things that we've talked about, red tape, uncertainty, all that is preventing houses from being built. I mean, am I being too simplistic?
Well, there are different challenges in the system, but let's take the area where we've just spoken about house building. That's exactly why we've got £768 million in the capital budget this year. It's exactly why we've also looked at how we'll spend that money. So, for example, because there's a housing emergency, what money can we provide to local authorities that have got the greatest pressure and provide that quickly through acquiring homes rather than building homes? But if I can just take this point...
You had more money in that budget, by the way, 4 years ago than you do now. You slashed it by 22% last year. You've put some back in, but it was a bigger budget 4 years ago when houses were cheaper to build.
Well, what we've actually saw from the Housing Coalition that came to us over a year ago was to restate the housing budget, and that's exactly what we've done. But if I can also...
You haven't. It's £65 million less than it was 4 years ago.
But if I can also take the point about private developers, the estimates we have from local authorities, and I appreciate these are very high-level estimates, suggest that there's 164,000 homes with planning permission that are not being built. So what can the government do about that? Again, the interventionist approach, which is a change in how the government works, to make sure that we are dealing with specific sites. So the government's not just sitting back, but we are involving ourselves in why things are not moving forward and providing investment or suggesting ways where we can move through. But we also need the private sector to be able to build out as well, because those 164,000 homes with planning permission would, of course, help with the housing emergency as well.
You're saying you're ploughing through and you're doing everything you can. There are more kids, according to Shelter, there are more homeless kids in Edinburgh at the moment than there are in the whole of Wales.
Well, I'm not going to say that we have made all the progress that we need to.
You declared an emergency a year ago.
Yes, and we have seen progress. So, for example, 20 out of the 32 local authorities in Scotland are seeing the numbers of children in temporary accommodation coming down.
But not the ones in our big towns and cities.
But I fully accept there is more to do. But that's exactly why the government took, as part of the housing emergency, a targeted approach to giving more money to Glasgow and to Edinburgh and to other areas with the highest challenges in temporary accommodation. And I give you one example about how the government has assisted the council in Edinburgh. We had void accommodation, so that's council homes that are sitting there with nobody in them, and that rate in Edinburgh was far higher than anywhere else. We changed our funding to be able to assist the city of Edinburgh, and they've seen their voids come down by 50%. So you make the most of the housing that's there, you acquire the housing as quickly as you can. We provided that for different areas of Scotland, and we build more homes.
Very straight question. Answer in a sentence if you can. Do you think you're doing enough at the moment?
I will always challenge myself to go further. To go back to the points that Sir Tom was making, we should always listen to
Do you think you're doing enough?
Who think that we should go further. But we are providing more money into the affordable housing. We're helping with planning to ensure that 20,000 stalled sites, 20,000 homes within stalled sites will be delivered. That's the activist government that we are taking forward. There's still more to do, but we are delivering on our promises.
Okay, I don't know if that was a yes or a no, but we can analyse that answer when we have more time. Shirley-Anne Somerville, thank you very much indeed for joining us in the studio this morning. Right, a change of pace now. Michael Gove was among the more colourful characters in the Conservatives' last period of office. As Levelling Up Secretary, he might be better remembered for the bespoke smoking hut he had built on the roof of his departmental office, as he is for anything he achieved inside the building. Then there was the footage, you might remember, of him happily raving alone in an Aberdeen nightclub. Of course, along with Boris Johnson, he was one of the key architects of the Brexit campaign. Well, now he is transitioning from Tory to Tory as he enters the upper chamber as Lord Gove of Torry. He's been speaking to our political correspondent, David Wallace-Lockhart.
The brass plate, of course, signifies that this is the editor's office.
Michael Gove is now editor of The Spectator magazine. But this coming week, he'll also enter the House of Lords as Lord Gove of Torry, a nod to the Aberdeen suburb.
That's where my dad was born. It's also where my parents got married and where I was baptised in St Fittick's Church. My dad's business, he ran a fish processing business, which was set up by my grandfather in Tory, closed when I was a teenager, or was taken over when I was a teenager. So from every point of view, Tory is Gove family heritage territory.
He'll be a Tory lord with a Scottish title. Does he worry for his party north of the border?
Russell Finlay's got less than a year now until that Holyrood election. Is it time to panic if you're potentially polling at fourth?
No, don't panic. If you're a fan of Aberdeen Football Club, you know that sometimes you'll have a very good run, sometimes you'll have a very difficult run, but in the end, you might end up in the top two. So, come the Scottish Cup final. So the important thing to do is not to change the manager, but to stick together as a team and to show the fighting spirit necessary to battle through.
But ultimately, Aberdeen could end up trophyless this season.
Well, they had a much more difficult patch a few months ago.
Mr Gove was part of a government that said no to formal Scottish Government requests for a second independence referendum. Will such a vote ever happen?
I don't believe that it's necessary at the moment. I think if there's an overwhelming desire on the part of the Scottish people for one, then we'd have to review the situation then.
How do you define overwhelming desire?
It's not for me. Ultimately, it's for the government, the Westminster government, to decide that they've got the daily responsibilities.
Clashes with the Scottish Government weren't limited to independence. In 2023, UK ministers used Section 35 of the Scotland Act to block Holyrood's gender reforms, which would have streamlined the process for people in Scotland changing their legally recognised sex.
I was the chair of the Cabinet subcommittee that took the decision. The arguments for taking that decision were made by Kemi Badenoch. Alistair Jack ultimately was the individual who had to take that decision and give effect to it. I think it was absolutely the right decision, and I think it's been vindicated by subsequent events. But defending women's rights and defending the principle that biological sex is the basis on which we decide who is a man and who is a woman, I think that was absolutely the right thing to do.
Was there any unease about this decision? Because obviously it was a massive constitutional moment, essentially striking down a piece of legislation that the Scottish Parliament had passed. Essentially a reminder to people in Scotland that the UK government ultimately could veto legislation.
It's there in the Scotland Act, Section 35, because at the time that devolution was legislated for, it was clear that there might need to be a fail-safe power in order to ensure that the overall rights of everyone in the United Kingdom could be protected.
And should that power be used sparingly, however, that's Section 35?
Oh, absolutely. It must be used sparingly.
Michael Gove, thank you very much for speaking to us.
Thank you.
Michael Gove speaking to David Wallace-Lockhart. The whole interview, by the way, is coming up in about half an hour on The Sunday Show on the radio on BBC Sounds. Before I go, remember, debate night on your screens this Wednesday. Don't just watch it, though. You can be in it. You can join the audience. If you want to do that, just search for Debate Night online. You'll find their page. There's a section there where you can find out where they're going to be and how you can get there and ask the questions yourselves. That's it from me. I'm back next week, same time, same place. I'll see you then. If you're with us on the radio this morning, though, the show goes on. Here's Graham Stewart.